we still believe, and I still know that this is the future of finance and commerce, that we will be in digital asset space moving forward. And while folks may resistance is futile. That's not in place right now, right? FTX wouldn't happen in Wyoming if it were a Wyoming regulated speedy bank, for example. Wouldn't happen. It would have been transparent. The bulk of our legislature, the majority in both chambers, has been strongly supportive of our efforts, and most of our legislation passes by typically 2/3, 3/4 full support. And that's been growing over the years because we've worked very hard to educate legislators so they understand that the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that they're seeing maybe in headlines doesn't turn out to actually be true all the time. But putting your dollars into a 100% reserved institution, you should have that opportunity. You should have the capacity to do that, and that's inexplicably being denied. The idea that the Federal Reserve can override what we contemplate to be, a fully compliant state chartered bank, that all the boxes have been checked and all I's dotted, all T's crossed, is unacceptable, and that is a challenge then to state sovereignty.
Senator Rothfuss, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy to have you on because you've been a leader in the state of Wyoming for establishing the legal and regulatory framework for the crypto industry, so that you can attract as much of it as possible. And I am really anxious to hear about what the current state of the situation is, given the custodia rejection recently. And what was the history? How did you get here? Tell us about some of the legislation that's been passed. And then we look forward to hearing about kind of what lies in the future, in your opinion. And thanks again for joining us.
Excellent. Well, right now, I think Wyoming is still working hard to be at the forefront of digital asset and cryptocurrency policy and regulation. We've been working in this space now for, actually, it was about 8 years ago that we started looking at digital assets and cryptocurrencies and how statute, policy, and regulatory structure interact with them, and really realized quickly that they didn't. There was no clarity within our statute, and no clarity around the rest of the country and anyone's statute. So there was a real opportunity to provide a sound regulatory structure that regulated to enable an industry rather than regulating to restrict, which has since become our mantra. And we actually started this, we started looking at cryptocurrency and digital assets back in 2015. We had a little digital privacy task force put together through the legislature, and former Representative Tyler Lindholm was a member of that with me. And a constituent came to him and said, "Hey, I can't seem to custody my Bitcoin in a wallet in the state of Wyoming. I'm excluded. One of the major exchanges wouldn't allow for any transactions in Wyoming." And Representative Lindholm was interested in finding out, what's the problem here? Why can't we operate in Wyoming? And we started to explore it, and we found out that the Money Transmitters Act, which all states except for Montana have an implementation of this Money Transmitters Act, and it was being interpreted by our Division of Banking such that you had to have an equal amount of fiat currency value to the amount of cryptocurrency value you have at any given time to transact. That was the interpretation, which showed kind of a fundamental lack of understanding of how these things worked. And we thought, well, that's an odd interpretation. How do other people look at it? Other states looked at it differently. And what we came to quickly realize is that any state that was looking at it in a rational way was doing so by blind luck. Any state like Wyoming that was looking at it in this awkward way, was doing so by blind luck. Nobody understood how it should be done. Nobody had a rational approach. Nobody even knew how they were approaching it. And so we saw a real opportunity here, and Representative Lindholm and I were both very interested in advanced technologies and cryptocurrency, and we thought this would be a space where Wyoming could really provide a service to the industry and help grow the industry by putting in place some clear regulatory structure, some clear statutes. And at the same time, we saw this as a real growth opportunity for the state of Wyoming. We need to evolve our industry into the 21st century and start developing a more diverse economy into spaces that really have strong futures and stop depending so heavily on the mineral extractive industry. So financial technology innovation seemed like a great place for us to do that. And at the same time, by kind of happenstance, Caitlyn Long was trying to make a contribution to the University of Wyoming in Bitcoin. And the university was, shrugged their shoulders. What's a Bitcoin? How would we take that? Can you hand it to me? Maybe in a pot? Wait. And so Caitlyn found our little nascent community of people that were trying to work on policy in this space. And we brought together a team of legislators and stakeholders and really started exploring from that point in 2015. Ran some legislation in 2016. Early on, just trying to close some loopholes, but really started up in earnest in 2017, when in that legislative session, we passed about 8 pieces of legislation related to digital currency transactions, taxation, electronic corporate records. We defined an open blockchain token is what we called it, or a consumer token, trying to provide some clarity between types of tokens that were and were not securities. That's a real challenge because unfortunately the SEC doesn't really care what a state thinks about what is and isn't a security, but we tried to provide clarity, and really began at that point in time of looking into the ways that we could add value working with industry. We created a task force at that time through the budget and started putting together more and more legislation. And one of the, I think, seminal pieces of legislation that we put forward was Senate File 125 back in 2019, which clarified digital assets standing under the Uniform Commercial Code. And this was an area where Wyoming really took a leadership role because the Uniform Law Commission at the time was working on digital assets and working on cryptocurrency and how it would be handled under the Uniform Commercial Code. And basically how it would be defined as property, how courts would treat it if courts were engaging with digital assets. And we looked at the Uniform Law Commission's approach, and it looked awful. It looked like they were going to treat it as a security, where somebody else basically effectively had ownership on your behalf of that asset. And we thought it would be a disaster for the industry to move it forward in that way. So we went off in our own direction. We picked a fight with the Uniform Law Commission. We passed the first of its kind legislation in the country and basically said, hey, if you have control, it's your asset. That's the authoritative proof. If you've got the keys, that is definitive. And since that point in time, the Uniform Law Commission actually went back to the drawing board. A lot of the same people that worked with us to draft our legislation worked with the Uniform Law Commission and became leaders in that group. And now the ULC, the Uniform Law Commission, is effectively recommending legislation that now some states are adopting that is consistent with Wyoming's statutes and largely based on our interpretation of it. So again, we've passed probably 30 plus pieces of legislation, the first DAO LLC legislation, the special purpose depository institution legislation, creating a new type of bank charter. I know we'll talk more about that. This year, we passed the Wyoming Stable Token Act, and we've got a lot of work to do there. So we really have worked very hard to forge legislative policy and regulatory structure that would allow the industry to innovate in Wyoming and to have bright lines and clarity. We also created a chancery court so that you had access to some expertise through the legal system if you do have conflict. instead of having to go through the traditional court structure. We've really worked with stakeholders to the best of our ability. We've listened, we've invited participation by stakeholders, and we feel like we're in a pretty good spot as a result. I've always focused on that economic benefit and knowing that if we built the ecosystem here, that we would stand a chance to create good jobs, create good economic development. And we certainly have seen companies that domiciled in Wyoming, relocated in Wyoming, and became excited about what we had to offer. So there's no question that's already underway. What we kind of looked at as a model and what inspired us was South Dakota back in the 80s made some changes to their statute that provided clarity and favorable structure for credit card companies. And they just tweaked their regulatory structure, and all the credit card companies re-headquartered in South Dakota in like 7 minutes, right? Everyone went there. And now about half of them, I think, still continue to domicile in South Dakota as a result of that favorable policy. So we knew that if we were a leader in providing clarity in this next generation of financial technology, that those stakeholders that were partnering with us would want to spend their time and locate in Wyoming. And we've seen that. There's no question that companies that otherwise would just be looking to domicile as Delaware companies in whatever state they feel like are trying to locate or looking to locate or engage with the state of Wyoming to whatever degree they need to, so that they can take advantage of our regulatory structure and advantage of the fact that we have, people who are taking this seriously and working favorably with stakeholders. We were thankful in the beginning when the state of New York passed their BIT license. You all remember that, right? They came down hard and said, no, we don't want cryptocurrency, and we don't want Bitcoin, and we don't want mining. And we cheered. Woohoo! That's good for Wyoming. If the state that's the current leader in finance is shutting this down, that certainly opens the door for us, and we benefited from that.
Well, since Silicon Valley Bank hit the headlines, Bitcoin maximalists have found a voice again. And what I've seen in a number of cases on Twitter is the statement, make sure that you take your Bitcoin off exchange and self-custody and move to favorable states like Texas and Florida. And I was scratching my head why Wyoming wasn't on there, because you are known for being advanced in the field of crypto. But I'm curious, where other states, your 30 pieces of legislation, where does that stack up against other states? And who's typically states follow other states, and
right.
And is that something have you been following, or have you been leading?
We've been leading. The legislation we've been passing is first of its kind legislation, and other states have typically copied and pasted most of what we've done into their statute, which is good because we've worked hard. We've worked with stakeholders. So those states like Florida and Texas that are taking this seriously are looking to Wyoming as the leader. So while Twitter, the Twitterverse might think it's Florida and Texas that's doing this work, the folks in Florida and Texas that are doing this work are by and large looking at what we did, and they're copying it if they can get it passed. Colorado's working to do the same thing. Other states that are becoming progressive in this space and want to be taking digital assets seriously are largely looking at what we've been doing and emulating that and trying to improve upon it, which is good, right? That's the nature of the legislative business. You look at what someone else did, you try and find the flaws, and you figure out how you can do it better. And we welcome that, and we're looking at what other states are doing, certainly. In any place that we see a state that had an idea that maybe we didn't think of, we try to circle back as the select committee and tackle that challenge as well. At the same time, one of the real advantages to the state of Wyoming and how we've done things and how we're capable of doing things, we are very dynamic. The select committee is bipartisan, bicameral. We've got leadership from both chambers that are involved. And so it's not partisan bickering or any of what we're used to in national politics. It's very collegial in trying to address problems and solve those problems. And we treat our legislation a lot like coders treat their code, right? You look at what feature set you want, you lock it in at some point, you try and get it as good as it can be, you pass that through the legislative process, but you immediately start on revision, right? You immediately figure out, what are the things that need to be tweaked? What's the feedback that we're getting? What isn't working for the stakeholder community? Our DAO legislation is a great example of that, where I think we've passed, we might have done 3 additional revisions on the original DAO LLC Act, and we're still taking it up as an interim topic this year to look at DAO corporations and other formulations that stakeholders have been asking for, because our existing LLC statute, our DAO supplement, might not be for everyone, right? It meets a lot of interests, but we're hearing that it doesn't meet all interests, so we're welcoming that. And being in the leadership position means you really have to do a lot more stakeholder outreach to understand the concerns and the problems and what might come up, try to anticipate those unforeseen circumstances and consequences, and put in the work, which is really what has positioned us well. I understand, at the end of the day, a big reason why Florida and Texas get attention is they're big states with lots of people, and lots of people in the digital asset space. So each of them has, more than an order of magnitude more just humans walking around in digital assets than we do. So it might be hard for us to compete in the Twitterverse, but in the legislative arena, we've been outperforming.
Probably a great strength of yours is that you are not the focus, and you're able to operate somewhat independently and not necessarily in the limelight.
Exactly.
Out of the 30 pieces of legislation, there are some. I imagine there's some central aspects to the health of a future Web3 locus of activity, and I suppose that the SPDI might be one of those, the banking system and the access.
Yeah.
That probably also was one of the pieces of legislation that took the longest to work through. Is that the right perspective? And tell us how that all happened and what the SPDI structure actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had some core concepts, some key puzzle pieces that we had to get in place. The first I mentioned a minute ago, which was how do you treat a digital asset, and different types of digital assets as property? So how does your state's legal system view a digital asset? That's represented by the Uniform Commercial Code. We mapped that out. That provides clarity to the courts and provides clarity to businesses on the fact that those digital assets will have standing in various ways. Then in listening to stakeholders, basically just saying, hey, what are the challenges? What are you facing that you're struggling with that we could help with? And this was probably in 2018-ish, early 2019, we were hearing, well, I'll tell you what we're really struggling with. Nobody will bank us. Yeah, we've got this great startup. We've got these great ideas. Blockchain is in the title of the company, and banks literally won't let us have accounts there. And that was part of this Operation Choke Point, where certain asset classes were being debanked by a previous administration. So major concern with that. And we thought, all right, well, so this is being implemented through the FDIC. What would it take to create a banking institution that didn't require the FDIC to be involved? And we worked that out. What we came up with was then our special purpose depository institution, a state chartered bank, as opposed to a federally chartered bank. And rather than allowing it to do fractional reserve lending, it would have to be 100% reserve. So when they bring in dollars, they've got dollars. And I hope everybody that's listening is thinking, wow, wouldn't that prevent everything that's happened in the last few weeks? Yeah, it probably would. Which was one of the things that we were anticipating, is how can we provide certainty that those assets were going to be there? So if you have a bank, a financial institution that was going to custody digital assets, and you were being excluded from FDIC insurance, then the form of the Speedy Bank came forward, which is 100% reserve. We actually reserve it at 102%. Because we really do take consumer protection very seriously in all of our legislation. So we figured, well, 100% is good, 102% is better. So a Speedy Bank has to have a 102% reserve of its fiat holdings at all time. And there are actually a few other financial protections in place. And then they also have the authority to custody digital assets at the same time. So this was a solution to the need of exchanges that were really struggling to move from fiat into crypto, and it would provide a one-stop shop for that, regulated by a state instead of the federal government and not subject to FDIC insurance requirements. And we established that legislation back in 2019, amended it in 2020 to improve it based on feedback we received. And boy, did we receive a lot of feedback. That was a pretty big deal of legislation there. A lot of people gave us their thoughts, their concerns, but always in a constructive way of, hey, let's build it up this way. Let's try and allow it to do that. And that group activity, that groupthink, crowdsourced legislation ended up producing a pretty good product. But regrettably, and as you both know, that product scares the hell out of the Federal Reserve and traditional financial institutions, because it empowers digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and the industry. So we've had the Federal Reserve push back on us.
And I guess the Kansas City Fed, by contrast, was working closely with you along the way by your intent, because they would ultimately be the approver,
right?
The approval source, and the allowing your banks to interact with the regional banking system, right?
Correct. So as we were drafting back in 2019, we did reach out to the KC Fed and provided them early drafts. We actually had included in that early legislation and in the early drafts some language that would direct the executive branch to file lawsuits and litigate any challenges from the Federal Reserve or from anyone else that would prevent us from implementing this type of bank charter. And in those early consultations, there was just generally assurances that, oh, don't worry, as long as you include these aspects that you've got in the legislation that would provide consumer protection, we think everything will be just fine. You don't need that language. And we took it out in good faith with the expectation that the Kansas City Fed would continue to work with us. And, first charter goes forward. We have a few applicants queued up for Speedy Bank charters. And then things just sort of started to slow down. The KC Fed was working with us, but, we have to consider this. It's going to take a little while. We need to give it some thought. These are applications that usually take very little time. Once the application for the master account goes to the Kansas City Fed, you can expect a decision in a matter of weeks. Those weeks stretched to months, those months stretched to year plus, year and a half, on to, I think, around 2 years before there was any type of decision. And what we saw clearly was that at some point, it transitioned from being, we're working with the Kansas City Fed, to the U.S. Federal Reserve seems to be pushing and doing things behind the scenes to stop this from actually happening and stopping our Speedy Banks from getting access to that master account.
Yeah, when we spoke with Caitlyn Long a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was maybe 3 weeks ago now, right after she had filed the lawsuits against the Kansas City Fed and the Federal Reserve, she'd been stating that the master account is something that the regional Fed banks don't withhold approval for, and that there are set rules about who is eligible, and when you're eligible, you essentially automatically get a master account, which is nothing more than an account to place your capital, right?
Correct. Yep. And it's critical, though. I mean, you have to have a place to put that cash to operate in the current banking system. Regrettably, you can't keep it in a pile in the corner. That doesn't work so well, and it also is contrary to business models that many entities that want that master account are interested in using. So when they step in and deny, and that it's a very infrequent, unacceptable outcome, it is a challenge to our two-tiered banking system, right? We have, as the state of Wyoming, the right to charter banks and to regulate banks that are state chartered banks. And those state chartered banks have the authority to operate in other states like any other bank, even if they're state chartered. And then there's the nationally chartered system. And
I think also from what I understood from Caitlyn, they have the right to have a master account at
yes,
the regional Fed.
exactly. Yep, absolutely.
So, is there recourse that, their recourse is to file lawsuits? Your legislation eliminated that clause. I assume that people can sue people for any reason. So what kind of recourse would be taken? I assume that's the executive branch that would need to do that.
Correct. So we've been having conversations with the executive branch, with the governor, about filing effectively and either joining the lawsuit with Custodia or filing a standalone lawsuit on behalf of the state of Wyoming and our two-tiered banking system, which, I think either of those, or if not both of them, would be important moves for us to make. The idea that the Federal Reserve can override what we contemplate to be, a fully compliant state chartered bank, that all the boxes have been checked and, all I's dotted, all T's crossed, is unacceptable. And that is a challenge then to state sovereignty by the Federal Reserve Bank. And the idea that somehow the Fed gets to control a state and has authority over one of the states of the union is unacceptable. I mean, that's going a little bit too far and certainly beyond the scope of what I would expect the Federal Reserve to be empowered with.
And Caitlyn told us that there's some question as to whether the Federal Reserve has any authority over a regional bank itself, the Kansas City Fed itself, that they are not supposed to be imposing authority downward.
Yeah, I mean, that's the strangeness of this circumstance. There's a lot of collusion where collusion's not supposed to happen. There's supposed to be independence among the regional banks from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent from the administration and the Treasury Department. And yet you follow the little trail of breadcrumbs, and it looks like there was just massive concerted effort to specifically shut down what we're trying to do. And I think there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it's a disruptive technology that challenges traditional financial institutions. They hate that. And they want to be the entities, the institutions that make money off of digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and virtual currencies. So once they have a handle on it, all of a sudden they'll be supporting it. And you see occasionally one of these, old traditional banks will file for the right to custody digital assets or to engage in this space. And somehow they're treated a little better. And it's almost like an expectation that it'll be approved. And then somebody might say, oh, wait, I forgot. We're denying Wyoming and everyone else from doing this. We can't say yes yet, but we're waiting to. And then at the same time, there's another camp that just really seems to hate digital assets. And this is, it's odd. There's bipartisan hatred for digital assets, and then there's bipartisan support and passion for digital assets. So it doesn't line up like a lot of traditional issues. It's almost on a camp by camp basis of, are you with us or are you against us? And you can certainly see the Federal Reserve and certain elements of the current administration, as well as certain elements of the previous administration, that are very anti-digital assets for whatever reason. And there's a multitude of reasons. There are trust issues, there are education issues where there just isn't an understanding. There are the headline issues of recent failures, which seem to be blamed largely on the cryptocurrency or the digital asset, when in truth, most of the failures are caused by more traditional shenanigans that we've been seeing since the 20s.
Way before that,
1920s. Yeah, and before that, right, exactly. So it's
How about, is there a faction within Wyoming that's resisting this?
Yes, I think so. We definitely have legislators that are not supportive of cryptocurrency and digital assets, but again, the bulk of our legislature, the majority in both chambers, has been strongly supportive of our efforts, and most of our legislation passes by typically 2/3, 3/4 full support. And that's been growing over the years because we've worked very hard to educate legislators so they understand that the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that they're seeing maybe in headlines doesn't turn out to actually be true all the time, and that it is often overhyped, misstated, a poor understanding of the real effects. And then the other thing that we've done that has kind of built support for a lot of the work that we've been doing is to demonstrate that the approach that we're taking, this regulated approach, but a proactive regulatory structure that enables, provides the consumer protection that's not in place right now. Right? FTX wouldn't happen in Wyoming if it were a Wyoming regulated speedy bank, for example. Wouldn't happen. It would have been transparent.
And there are two, and as I understand, there are two reasons for that. One is that the assets would have been held in custody outside of the FTX organization, right, off balance sheet. And the second is that the reserves that would have been required for deposits would have been in excess of the deposits.
Exactly. Yep. So what they said was there would have to be there, and you would have somebody auditing it. I mean, when you have a division of banking that you're responsible to, where they're looking at your books, that's a requirement of being a state chartered regulated bank. You don't get to say, all right, well, I'm gonna lend it 3 different ways, and we're gonna take these assets, we're gonna move them over there for a little while because it's gonna look good on their balance sheet. That's not a thing you do if you're a regulated bank. And so you think about, who needs some blame in all of these collapses and poorly handled institutional either representations or decisions of management of assets. It comes down to the regulators that are choosing not to regulate in an appropriate way. And in fact, they're not even letting us, the state of Wyoming, regulate appropriately.
Exactly. No, the Attorney General, where does your Attorney General stand on this? And how much of a priority? Obviously, he didn't get angry and file a lawsuit immediately, or she.
It's a she. Yeah.
What's happening in that office? Do you
so
think?
Our structure for the AG's office is that the Attorney General is an appointee of the governor's office. So it really comes down to working with the governor and getting the governor to commit and file a lawsuit. And so those are conversations that I've certainly been having with the governor, and others have as well. And the governor is certainly taking it very seriously and trying to look at the right position.
Are they apprehensive at all about picking a fight with this gigantic monolithic appearing?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there was a lot of desire to have it just turn out well, and so the governor has been involved over the past couple of years, making phone calls to former colleagues and colleagues at the Federal Reserve. The Governor Gordon was actually on the KC Federal Reserve Board quite a few years ago. That was one of his past incarnations, and then he was our state treasurer prior to becoming governor, so he had a lot of interaction in this space and a lot of experience. So he tried to address some of those concerns and address the problem in the process informally. But I think we're at the point now where it's not working. We need a court to step in and slap the hand of the Fed.
So you've attracted a lot of engineering talent and innovation to the state of Wyoming around the Web3 concept. And where do things stand now? I guess the access to the banking system is somewhat of a threat to the ambitions of Wyoming to be a mecca, although other states don't have any more advantage than you would in that.
Right.
But What are people thinking about now, and does it harden the objectives to become a mecca, or what is the thinking, and what are the factions?
Well, we still believe, and I still know that this is the future of finance and commerce, that we will be in digital asset space moving forward. And while folks may resist, resistance is futile. So we'll get there. And the question is, what pieces do we need in place to effectuate that transition? We need banking, and that's what the Speedy Bank role is going to be. We'll continue fighting there. We need digital assets to be integrated into our corporate structure in a meaningful way. So we need cryptographic signature authorities. We need our corporate filing system to be Web3 compliant. That's another puzzle piece that we're working on to get to the point where you can authenticate a company based on a public key that's at the Secretary of State's website, and then you can do authentication and transaction based on deep knowledge that they are who they say they are. We need we need DAO type compliance for our corporations as well. So we've been working heavily on that, trying to ensure that next generation corporate structures are legal in Wyoming, recognized, understood, and that there's clarity for how to operate those under Wyoming statute. And that's an area where we're continuing to grow. And I invite everyone to reach out and let us know what is needed there so that we can get that right moving forward. Digital assets and the registration of digital assets. We just passed a Digital Asset Registration Act, a Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, which will go into effect in July, that allows you to domicile an asset in Wyoming and say, this digital asset exists in Wyoming. That's where it is, right? And there's no sense of that right now. A digital asset is, we don't even really know at any given time where it is. It's probably on a server owned by a very large company, and we're not sure which server it's on unless we check, where subscription is at any given time, right? So from a legal standpoint, that leads to ambiguity of how those digital assets will be treated and what jurisdiction will be under, who taxes it, how it's taxed, how it's handled, managed, where you bring a lawsuit. So we created this registration capacity where you could say this digital asset, maybe an NFT, maybe a Bored Ape, right? It's in Wyoming. That's where it's at, subject to Wyoming law.
And how does, so that's fantastic. That's really very curious and phenomenal. Do you have to stand in Wyoming with your digital asset at some point, or you can just declare it?
So the way it's structured right now, you have to be a Wyoming resident. And let me clarify what that means. That can be an individual who lives in Wyoming, or it can be, for example, an LLC domiciled in Wyoming. That's the vehicle we expect to be used right now. So if you have 10 Bored Apes that you want subject to Wyoming jurisdiction, you would create a Wyoming LLC. You would assign ownership to the Wyoming LLC, and then you would register those assets as belonging to this Wyoming resident, an LLC. And then they're all Wyoming property. That's where they exist.
Wow, that is genius. Has any other
No.
state done that? That is really clever.
No. But I'm sure they probably will, because again, this is the work we're trying to do to enable. And this was one of the tasks we took on a couple of years ago. Remember, it was probably about 2-ish years ago when NFTs really started to take off, and we started the conversation of what the hell are these things? How are they going to be treated legally? I don't know that all the answers are provided, but we thought at least if they are able to declare that they're subject to the jurisdiction of Wyoming and Wyoming law, then you'll have case law available, you'll have the Chancery Court, you'll have the bright lines of our Uniform Commercial Code. And as a result, we expect that to be popular for the high dollar digital assets. You wouldn't do this for, if you had, if you had some of the rug pull style NFTs. I don't think you have to spend a lot of time
Exactly.
registering them, but
Exactly.
uh,
Well, and so there's also been work on digital identification beyond that.
yeah.
That's still in progress.
So digital identity has been one of our priorities for quite a few years. And we put in place the first real framework defining a digital identity and providing that digital identity has statutory authority. What we've been working on now, and what I hope to have some legislation for the next session, is clarity of the self-sovereign digital identity principles of Christopher Allen, for example, that he's been working on through the W3C Foundation and through his work for years. Clarity about your rights over your digital identity, as well as the property rights of data associated with that digital identity. So now kind of going back to Brittany Kaiser, own your own data kinds of concepts, where you've got privacy rights and inalienable rights associated with your digital identity, but then you've also got property rights. And it turns out it's a real struggle to separate those out. We've been working with some great people from all over the world trying to do that. But that's one of the Herculean tasks that we're currently trying to tackle is protecting an individual's digital identity in all of the manners in which it manifests. We look to, we look to like the CCPA in California as a nice privacy rights protection umbrella. And that's based on, European model, GDPR. And then we've seen other states kind of adopt it. Colorado did an act a couple of years ago that looked to California's and honed it in a little bit. The challenge there is it assumes everyone's always a consumer, and it's not an intrinsic digital identity oriented approach or structure. It's Google can't do bad things to you, or Microsoft can't do bad things to you. It really only solves the problem for kind of the large companies and provides protections there, and only as a consumer in a consumer capacity. So it really hasn't been satisfactory for us just to emulate those. We're trying to get the best bits of that, but your digital identity should be protected against the government as well, and against others that even when you're not acting on a consumer basis. So how do we draw those lines in a way that's generalized and is always your digital identity's protections, not just restrictions on large companies?
It only came out yesterday, but did you get a chance to look at the president's economic plan that on digital assets?
I did. I didn't read it in as much detail as I planned to, but certainly looked through chapter 8, the one that was kind of specifically on digital assets and their criticisms of it. It was disappointing, certainly.
Yeah, it seems so much that they were saying, here's all of the potential that all these people think exists with it: better payment systems and freedom from government and a good list of all of the benefits of crypto. And then they say, but it hasn't gone anywhere yet. It hasn't delivered any of these except pain and suffering, and therefore it can't be valuable.
Right. Yeah, it's very dismissive of an incredible technology, and the technology is nascent, and it still obviously needs to grow. There are plenty of bad actors out there. We all know that. We need to find ways to get rid of the bad actors and support the good actors and get to the vision that I think we all have that are supporters of what this is intended to look like. So all of the benefits that are suggested are realizable benefits. The thing that I struggle with, and this bothers me in this report, it bothers me in the Wyoming legislature and in debates on these types of topics, is the idea that the alternative or the existing system, the status quo, is somehow perfect and flawless, and that cryptocurrency and digital assets have to achieve absolute perfection, otherwise they're no good. All you have to do is outperform the existing awful system that keeps leading to bank runs and collapse, that is designed to consolidate wealth into a small number of hands. That's what I'm competing with. So we might not be working with perfect tools yet, but at least it doesn't do what the current system does yet. And I understand that early, as when technologies are in their early stages, you have those that are passionate about the technology go to it quickly, and those that feel that they can exploit the technology go to it quickly. And that's every new technology, right? So that's where you see these moments and these trials and these challenges that we have. Every great disruptive technology goes through this type of cycle. And again, it would be like, well, I'm sorry, this internet thing back in the 90s, this will never do. People are saying bad things over the internet, and they're doing money laundering and other things over the internet. So let's abolish the internet. I feel like it's the same message, and thank heavens that message didn't prevail back in the 90s.
That's right. For Bitcoin, it's about 15 years now, and that would put you somewhere around, year 2000. And it's as if somebody looked around and said, "Okay, we know that it's not going to work, so let's just
right, yeah, we're done here." Yeah, absolutely. And when you sit down with somebody and kind of talk that through, most of the time they come around, they're like, "All right, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you don't have to be perfect. The current system is not perfect. The current system is far from perfect. It's inefficient in its operation. It has so much opportunity for graft along the way. It manipulates those that are already disenfranchised and disenfranchises them further, and then risks your capital whether you like it or not."
Unsecured loan to the bank, as Caitlyn said.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the alarming developments, of course, that was also highlighted is that now that so much money is electronically controlled, that instantaneous bank runs of size is a new phenomenon.
Right.
And that inherently makes the banking business model unstable, much more unstable than it used to be. That is it's hard to deny that.
Yeah, it's true. And you look at Silicon Valley Bank and the amount of assets that they were holding in U.S. Treasuries, which is it's a good secure asset to hold, but they were 10-year Treasuries, and you have this rapid run where this secure instrument needs to be liquidated instantaneously. So you're basically flooding the market. You depreciate the value of the asset, and you end up taking a loss on a strong asset because of the immediacy of that. If they had to meet liquidation needs on a slower timeline, they would have certainly performed a lot better. I don't know exactly how it would have turned out, but I'll just say they would have performed a lot better.
Yes, and if the Federal Reserve or the Treasury is going to somehow bail out banks by giving by providing the gap up to par, then it's tantamount to paying the higher interest rates immediately rather than on a rolling basis. As
right.
Old treasuries mature and you issue new ones at a higher rate, our interest expense as a government is rising by that refinance amount. But if somebody has to all of a sudden cover the losses, then you're accelerating this big problem that the governments have. I'm glad that I'm not the Federal Reserve Chair right now.
No, it is certainly a struggle, and it really just comes down to this fractional reserve lending approach, which honestly, I was thinking about this the other day. We all take for granted that that's the normal rational approach. We really do. We've internalized it over the years because throughout my entire lifetime, that's been the normal approach. I transfer my wealth, my funds to a bank, and they immediately loan it out, and I don't think twice about that. That is expected. But when you stop and you pause, you step back and you think about it for a minute, and you think, wait, I don't, did I agree to that? Is, my money is at risk, and you do have, insurance that will pay and cover a certain portion of that. But at the end of the day, every time we've seen global financial instability, it always comes right back to this, right? Banking liquidity. That's what it always comes back to. And so it's ironic then that Wyoming creates a special purpose depository institution that has 100% reserve assets, and we can't get that approved in a world that seems okay with intrinsically risky banks that continuously are the source of global financial distress.
It would be interesting, as Caitlyn Long tweeted out just the other day, maybe yesterday, if they hadn't made that decision for 3 more weeks, what would the decision be now?
Right, exactly. Yeah, maybe it's not such a bad idea. Maybe fully reserved banking should be allowed and encouraged, in fact, which really does just make sense. And it provides a consumer flexibility. You probably should get more money if you put your if you put your dollars in an institution that is going to loan that money out. You should receive a premium for the risk associated with your funds. You don't necessarily get much of a premium now, but putting your dollars into a 100% reserved institution, you should have that opportunity. You should have the capacity to do that, and that's inexplicably being denied.
Another question came to mind when I saw that Governor DeSantis in Florida just either proposed the idea of not allowing a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, issued by the U.S. to be in Florida. I assume that means legal tender or whatever. I hadn't given that much thought that a state would say, I'm not going to take it. Have you all thought about that? And would Wyoming be interested in blocking the government's use of CBDCs?
So blocking the government's use, I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things that I'm never a fan of trying to ban things as my approach to governance, right? I mean, that seems a little contrary. I don't spend a lot of time trying to think of what we can stop people from having access to. That's not usually my priority. Wyoming, we many of us still aspire to kind of a little bit of a libertarian mindset there, where we like to be giving people more rights than less. So I don't know that that's the right approach. I don't think a CBDC is going to be a positive if it comes from our Federal Reserve in any way that we have an expectation of it coming, right? It's going to be trackable, controllable, reversible. It's going to be all of the things that that enthusiasts of cryptocurrencies want to get away from. But banning it as a state, I don't know what that will do.
Yeah, it's might as well see what it is and see how.
Yeah. It's one of those. I mean, it makes for good rallying points. You can shake your fist, and obviously that governor is in a position where he's kind of interested in talking points that draw attention.
When I heard that he had said something about CBDCs, I thought, oh, that's smart, thinking it was part of a campaign pledge of, if I'm president, it will never happen. Don't
do that. That's right. That's fine. Yeah, I do not support CBDCs, and as president, I will not move one forward. That's great.
That would seem to be a very popular position to take. But when I read the story, I didn't read actually the story. It was just kind of a headline, and he's trying to ban it in Florida. Right. I don't know.
But you think about it, and what we have right now through our existing system with U.S. dollars, for the most part, although we can have cash dollars still, for the most part, it's almost like an inefficient CBDC already, because the federal government can control any fund transfer, track any fund transfer, manipulate reverse through the banking system. So the current system is a slow and inefficient version
Yeah, I
of,
guess that's
of
good.
what a CBDC aspires to be.
That's right. Is there pending legislation or anything that anybody who's watching this can
Yeah.
voice an opinion about that you would want to share?
Absolutely. So one of our newest pieces of legislation that it just passed, it'll go into effect shortly, and we've got a lot of work ahead. And this is a good transition off of the CBDC concept, is we have put forward a Wyoming stable token through the Wyoming Stable Token Act, which is sort of the anti-CBDC in the way that we hope to operate it. Obviously very optional, but the concept is, instead of it being a new coin and have its own floating value, the state of Wyoming would issue a token which is representative of a US dollar held in trust by the state of Wyoming on behalf of the token holder. So we hold the dollars. That allows you to utilize effectively a stable dollar-like token within digital asset space, whether that's with DAOs, whether that's paying for your coffee, anything else you want to do with it, that option would be there. And then it'll always be able to be transitioned back to that dollar. The dollars that are held in trust cannot be used for any purpose other than purchasing U.S. Treasury bills, so short term, so that we have capacity for liquidity. And much like our Speedy Bank law, not only do we have a 100% reserve, we have a 102% reserve on the funds held in trust. So it's not an asset that would be anything like a security. It's not going to appreciate in any way. But if there is a desire for anybody to have a stable token that they can have confidence in, particularly in light of what happened recently with USDC and what we've seen in the past with Tether, this would provide an alternative. At some point, I don't know that it'll be necessary. We talk a lot about the fact, how long will this last? I don't know. When there are solid, stable alternatives that meet the volatility, or that address the volatility concerns that many have right now with whether or not they want to utilize digital assets and cryptocurrencies, then it may not be useful. But this is one more of those puzzle pieces where kind of one of the key challenges we wanted to overcome is for Wyoming, for the state of Wyoming to be able to transact in cryptocurrency. What does it take for the state of Wyoming to transact? And this was a solution to that problem.
Interesting. So, where does the extra 2% come from?
So when you're holding those, when we're holding the dollars and investing them in treasuries, we're gaining a yield off of the treasury bills. And that yield goes to pay for operations and then build up the reserve to 2%. And then it actually goes into our school trust fund after that.
Ah, great. That makes sense. Well, awesome. This has been fantastic. Congratulations to you and your colleagues in Wyoming for leading the charge. And I look forward to moving to Wyoming someday.
Well, we look forward to having you. And at the very least, right, you can domicile all of your digital assets in Wyoming anytime you feel like it.
Sounds like a great idea. Senator, thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.